Martin, who you know very well, and has been a member here for about 30 years. So, over to Martin.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to come along. I suppose I should have handed these out earlier, but whilst I'm talking, maybe you could pass them round. And there's just prompts for me, if you like, for talking, the sort of things I'm going to talk about. And might remind you as I go along what we've been talking about, and you can ask some questions at the end. And I've also brought some books about meditation here and a book about the Four Noble Truths, because I'm not planning to give you an exposition on Buddhism or to talk in detail about Buddhist meditation. I thought the best thing was to have some books that you can take away with you if you're interested, and by all means pass them on to your friends if you find that when you finish with them. These are free distribution that come from the Amravati Buddhist Monastery, which is 4 miles up the road in Great Gaston. I thought I'd focus on what Buddhism means to me. So, first of all, I meditate every day for 30 minutes or an hour. And this is a one, to be honest, I also make a cup of tea so that I have a cup of tea at the same time. I find this a really good time to meditate. And it is something I encourage people to do, because I teach Buddhist retreats, and I always encourage people to develop a daily practice of meditation, because it's like riding a bike. Well, not really like riding a bike. So when you've got the idea of riding a bike, you can ride it. But with Buddhist meditation, it's more like learning to play the violin, where you just, the more you do it, the better you get at it. So it's something to have as a daily practice, and then in time you start to really enjoy it. So you do it because you enjoy it, rather than because you're learning or training yourself to do something. So my meditation practice is primarily to notice what arises in the mind, and this is called mindfulness. So one of the features about mindfulness is not to interfere with the mental content. So first I establish an upright posture, so I'm used to sitting on the ground, on the floor, cross-legged, and then to be aware of the body, and the upright posture encourages energy, so that first of all it's easier to sustain your effort and awareness. And then I just open the mind, allow whatever arises to arise, and be present with that, and not to interfere with it. Now, you might find that a bit strange. You think, well, what if you have something which is unpleasant, or you say anger or hatred arises? Well, wouldn't you do something about it? But the principle of mindfulness practice is simply to observe the flow of experience and to notice our likes and dislikes. So if we don't like our state of mind because it's angry, then rather than acting out of aversion to our state of mind and stopping it and saying, no, I'm not going to have anger and getting rid of it, that's suppressing it, isn't it? So it's more to allow anger, oh, that's anger, and to know it for what it is, rather than try to choose and say, no, I don't want that unpleasant state of mind. Or again, if you have a very pleasant state of mind, you feel yourself being sucked into it, you have to step back and see that's attractive, this is something I can feel myself moving towards. And just to hold back from that, so that we can observe our reactions. And the purpose of this is to see our underlying, say, tendency to judge, so that we become less judgmental. And our tendency to say, this is who I am, this is not who I am. We can say, I'm not the sort of person that has angry thoughts. Therefore, if we're not careful, we just get rid of them and never really realise who we really are. Yes, we are the person that has angry thoughts. I am a person that can have murderous instincts when my wife says this. And it's, otherwise, without allowing, and really looking at these things, we can't relate to other people who have murderous instincts. And so we have to allow the things we don't like as well as the things we do like into our minds. And you could say it's a bit like a self-therapy. You're not the therapist. The therapist sits there just listening and doesn't really put much into it, and the idea is to just observe what the mind does. And that's my meditation practice. But what can flow from that is that sometimes things stick. And if I notice hatred arising, and it doesn't, the first thing that I notice is hatred. If I notice anxiety, I notice it's anxiety. And when you notice the quality of mind, the object has disappeared. If you think about it, the thing that's causing anxiety to arise isn't present when you know anxiety, because the mental object of anxiety is a separate object to the story that's causing anxiety to arise. So you've shifted your mental object away from the story to become the one that's the quality of mind rather than the content. So the same with anger. There's something that causes you to be angry. The story comes to an end when you notice this is anger. And so by constantly noticing the quality of the mind, the felt sense, if you like, of our experience, and letting the storyline come to an end, we don't keep on generating states of mind like this, but we notice what they are. So we don't have to judge it, but we just can accept it. And then what we can find is that having recognised there's a lot of anger, sometimes it doesn't go away, and we can investigate what's causing it. So when I had an experience recently with a friend I'd had for 30 years, and for some reason, I felt angry. I had to admit it. For a long time I didn't want to admit I felt angry about this person. So the first step is to admit it. Yes, I do feel angry. And ultimately, when I investigated it, I realised I had to do something about this relationship. So it doesn't mean that you never have any action following from it. It may be that what you have is a very strong sense that I'm going to do some hard work to reconcile to this conflict. But initially we understand it. So when we act, instead of acting out of aversion, we act out of wisdom. If you act out of my initial instinct is, how can I change this person so they're not annoying me? Rather than how can I change myself so that I'm not annoyed by that person? So that's acting out of wisdom rather than acting out of aversion. And you can see as just an example, but you can apply how you can apply that in your life, that you can change. But Buddhism is based on the premise that we change the world by changing ourselves. And then, because if something that comes out of changing ourselves is that we can start to do something that's really beneficial in the world, then that would come naturally. But we don't try to fix the external world at first. We look at what's in the internal world that's causing us not to be content with the external world. So many things arise that we don't like. But we have to first of all see what is it. So what is it in us that can't accept the way things are? Can I change myself first, or do I, before I can change the other person? And then we can act out of wisdom instead of acting out of aversion. Living according to the Four Noble Truths in the middle way. This is fundamental teaching of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths, and there's a book about it here. His first sermon was about the Four Noble Truths, and he taught for 40 years on pretty much the same theme. Although his teaching is vast, and you can say, the teaching that has been handed down is vast, it all comes down to the same basis. First of all, I'm mentioning the middle way. The middle way, which is the path that you would follow. The path of is the fourth noble truth. But just to look at that first, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. These are all about morality, about the way we behave, live our lives. Right effort, mindfulness, and concentration. This is about how you cultivate and train the mind. And right understanding intention is about how we understand the world and how we can, and our attitude towards the world and our experience. So those are 8 factors, and each of them, there's no kind of, it's not a linear path, it's a simple kind of, how can we kind of, it's almost like a circle. So you could say, you could start at anywhere, but let's say you start with right effort, mindfulness and concentration. As I mentioned already, meditation. So you need the effort to just do it, don't you? So it takes a bit of effort to come to meeting, to sit in silence. It requires a certain amount of effort. And mindfulness is being aware, observing, noticing what's happening, not just in our meditation, sitting, but during our life, day-to-day living. And concentration is a calming, it's really not it means calming and finding some peace in our lives, not focusing, although there is a certain training that we can benefit from to be less distracted about, in our what comes up in our experience, so that we can direct our lives rather than be just simply responding or reacting to our experience. Then right understanding comes from that. So seeing things as they are, as opposed to how we would perhaps want them to be, that informs our intention. So that that means that changes our attitude towards life. So when you see things, perhaps something that you haven't seen clearly before, when you see it clearly, your attitude changes, and so that you're inclined towards, in a slightly different direction, slightly differently to how you were before. So that would be right intention, and then that leads towards effort. That leads towards speech, action, and livelihood. So you could go in that, taking a circle back to how we live our lives. So our right speech is to be truthful, honest, to avoid harmful speech, to do beneficial action as opposed to harmful action, to have a good and beneficial livelihood as opposed to a harmful livelihood. That's the 8-fold path. It's the middle way because it's a way of moderation. So Buddhism doesn't take things to extremes. So it's how you balance these things appropriate to your life and the conditions that you're living in, and the step-by-step, gradual path, so that it's hard to get our speech right. It's very difficult, it's challenging, and so sometimes we fail, but that's all right, because we're just taking a step-by-step approach, and if we can perhaps be more honest in the future, more honest in the present moment, more honest in the future, we can let go of the past, because that's all gone, and there's nothing we can change about the past. But it's little step by step, we can train ourselves to be towards honesty, for example. The premise of the Four Noble Truths, the first one, second, and the third. The first, it's based on the principle that the suffering of the world arises through greed and desire. And the freedom from that is when greed and desire comes to an end. So it's not difficult to see that suffering does arise. The origin of suffering, Buddhist thinking, it's all coming from, ultimately, from greed, self-centered desires. But what the Buddha is really focusing on in his teaching is about how we can change ourselves rather than how we can change the world. So we need to first look at the suffering we create in our own lives out of greed and desire and hatred. In fact, there are three roots of what you could call evil. In Buddhism, it's greed, hate, and delusion. Greed, hate, and delusion. And so we can see this in our own lives. But the great thing about the first noble truth, which is there is suffering, is it's totally admitted and accepted. And in fact, the principle is the first step to understanding the first noble truth is to admit it hurts. So there is suffering, and it's not something we have to run away from. I think society has an idea that we shouldn't suffer, and we should always be trying to be happy. And Buddhism has a different approach and says, yeah, it's okay. Suffering is something you can't fix. You can't resolve it. You can't stop other people's suffering. They're going to create their own suffering. And in a sense, you can't stop yourself suffering. We all have bodies that will come to an end. Pain is inevitable. Death's inevitable. Separation from those we love is inevitable. There's suffering from that perspective is inevitable. But we don't, and there's nothing wrong in that, because suffering, if you like, that sort of suffering of separation that arises on a bereavement is a natural thing to feel. But what we don't need to do is add to it. We can accept loss and the pain that comes from loss, and just, that's it. That's how it feels to be a human being. It's a natural human experience. But it doesn't, what we don't, the thing we add to it is, I shouldn't feel this way. It shouldn't be like this. Well, actually, no, it should be this way, and I should feel this way because I'm a human being. But Buddhism doesn't have a perspective of a divine being that's responsible, and we can't blame anybody else. We can only, if we blame anyone, it's blame ourselves for being human. But what's to blame? There's nothing to blame. We're humans. Therefore, if you cut me, it hurts. It's like that. If I experience a mental suffering because something occurs and somebody I love is hurt, then it's a natural thing to expect that to arise. It would be a worry if it didn't. You know, we should be fully human. That's the objective of Buddhism, is to be fully human. But not to create suffering out of that. We don't have to add the idea, it shouldn't be like this, I shouldn't, why does it happen to me? That's something we add and we don't need to. And that's the sort of suffering that Buddha is saying in the First Noble Truth, is we create suffering because we continually adding suffering to our experience by saying it shouldn't be this way. Then so the second noble truth is it's greed, it's desire, it's aversion, attraction and aversion, it's wanting things to be otherwise, it's wanting to get things we haven't got, it's all of that drives the world towards things, trying to possess things that are material things that are going to slip through their fingers. Ultimately, there's nothing you can hold on to, it's not yours. So it's not going to lead to any ultimate peace or happiness, the pursuit of material wealth or goods or whatever it is. Or even the pursuit of the perfect relationship, for example. You know, it's just an idea, isn't it? So you create these sort of visions and dreams, and we spend a lot, if we're not careful, we can live in our lives as a dream, like always, trying to get something that's just an idea, and not being with the reality of the world, and not being really fully human in the present moment. So that leads me to social action. And social action isn't something Buddhists are as good at as Quakers, because we're not with Buddhists because they want to act with wisdom, that can take a bit of time. So they think, well, when's the wisdom going to arise so I know what to do? And of course it doesn't. It takes, you can't always know what's the right thing to do. But the Buddhist practice is to create some space around our experience. So when we have a situation where we would like to do something to help, we notice a desire to help first. I would like to get this blind person from this side of the road to that side of the road. And now you notice that desire, and instead of just rushing up, grabbing hold of them and take them across the road, we would go up to them and say, would you like to cross the road? Because that's actually the wise thing to do. Maybe they're perfectly happy on this side of the road, but they'd rather stay there. So it's just having that little bit of space to sort of think, yeah, I would like to help, but what's the wise way to help? What can I do that's truly beneficial? So we kind of try to have action based on right understanding, right intention, so understanding the situation, and our intention is to really try to understand our intention. Our intention, if our intention's got self-interest in it, we should notice that, because very often our desire to alleviate suffering, for example, is because we don't want it. We can't bear the person's suffering because it's hurting us, but we're actually acting out of self-interest to do something that we think is kind of beneficial to them. And you need to know that, because you have to be very careful you're not acting, that you're actually truly acting for the benefit of the other person, and not just to alleviate your suffering, because you can't bear to see them suffering. It may be that they don't need the thing that you think that they need. We all have, we do this along in the Bible, we bring our ideas of what people in developing countries need, without really asking them properly what they really need, and really do something that's truly beneficial. Then, with personal responsibility, this is very important in Buddhism, because there isn't Buddhism doesn't have a divine being to ask what to do. It's not that the Buddha denies that there may be divine beings in the world, but there's no, because the Buddha, if you like, the Buddha doesn't have an opinion about whether there's a creator God or not, because from a Buddhist perspective it has no bearing on whether we can alleviate our suffering. To know that. It's not a question that leads other than to opinions and views and disputes and arguments and conflict. The Buddha doesn't talk about, well, he's not interested in things that can't be known. And from a Buddhist perspective, you can't know whether there's a creator God. So what? Let's not argue about it. Let's just accept there's a possibility, but who knows? It doesn't matter, because that's, the origin of the world is interesting, but it's not ultimately important for us to know what to do in the present moment. So we don't put faith, if you like. Faith isn't something, faith in somebody else. You have to have faith in yourself, or confidence in yourself to know what's the right thing to do. Not kind of, otherwise, if you just do what other people say, if you say, God told me to do this, then when it's not right, you blame God. So it has to be something that has to come from you. So it's quite demanding, because you have to think, oh yeah, I'm responsible for it. I therefore have to be fully confident to know what's the right thing to do. And that kind of sense of developing one's self-confidence is really important. I found really valuable. Blind faith is of no value. The truth lies within ourselves. We have to find it for ourselves. It's not something external. The Buddha's teachings are full of, we've got the Dhamma, it's called the Dhamma, and the Dhamma translates as the truth. But it's pointing to the truth of reality, and then the truth is the truth within us. It's not some sort of dogmatic utterance or some statement that we have to believe in. So that's why our meditation we practice meditation so that we might, so that the truth that we already have, the truth we have already inside us can be revealed. And it's not, this is really quite, I don't know whether it's different to the way other people, some people may not think this way, but for me it's very clear that everyone has the truth already. And it's not too different from some Quaker ideas, is it, the love of God within everyone. But from the Buddhist perspective, everyone has truth. Everyone has that truth within them. It's only hidden. So like delusion is just like clouds hiding the truth. When the delusion's gone, the truth is revealed. It's like that. So the truth's already there. It's not something you have to create. This is wonderful because you don't have to become wise. It's something that happens. It's already within us, so we just have to see it. And the interesting thing is that it's so close to us we can't see it. This is a Buddhist perspective on it. So we keep pushing away the truth because we don't really want to accept the way things are. So that's kind of seeing the light. There is a, sense that the Buddhists seeing the light would be a kind of truth that's empty of self. There's no self-delusion in this, or desire for it to be this way. I avoid how we don't want to be like this, but an acceptance of the way things are. And being open to the truth is letting go of beliefs and fixed views. Because one thing that's interesting is that there's really no views of any value in Buddhist thinking. It's not like there are better views than worse views, or good opinions and bad opinions, because yes, and so you can value that there are some qualitative differences, but they're all views and opinions, and there all these conflict and disagreement, and really can be categorised, if you like, as views and opinions. So we don't. They're not. If you're looking for truth in the form of a good opinion or a good, if it's like, one day I'll find the perfect view, the perfect opinion, then it's not truth, because from a Buddhist perspective, truth, and I've got to redefine words here, because I know my use of the word truth is conventionally just like a good idea, but truth is a realization, is in Buddhist thinking. It's seeing the light is an experience that shifts the way you live, or the way you see the world. It's a shift in reality, an inner shift of seeing things in a different way. It's not like, in fact, as you experience and start to see things more clearly, words start to lose their meaning and just become something that creates dispute. You can argue about words, but you can't argue about a realization, and that's the realization of truth that I'm talking about. And I wondered would Buddhists subscribe to the peace testimony, and I think that's quite interesting. The first precept of Buddhism is not to harm life, and but the whole idea of precept is that it's not commandment. So there are at least five precepts that Buddhists live by. Not harming life, not taking what's not given, not indulging in sexual misconduct, not lying, or then not using intoxicants to confuse the mind. So those five precepts, but they're not commandments. So we are just, our intention is not to harm life, but it's inevitable that then you might stand an ant. It's when we do a lot of gardening, and it's inevitable that some things get killed on the way, but it's not our intention. So that's still observing this precept of not harming life. Does that mean that Buddhists would subscribe to peace testing? Well, I wouldn't impose that on anyone. I wouldn't say, if you're a Buddhist, you must subscribe to peace testimony, because it's for people to understand and interpret at their own pace and in their own lives, step by step. How can I apply the principle of not harming life And what does that mean? And it's not a dogmatic kind of statement, and it's not a commandment that thou must not harm life. It's simply a direction. It's like a signpost. If you head in that direction, then you won't harm yourself. You'll harm yourself less, and you'll harm other people or other beings less. And in the same way, not harming life, you would not being honest. Your honesty is beneficial to yourself and others, but it's a gradual path. And sexual misconduct is too something that you could kind of perhaps have to, as you maybe different, as we go through different ages of life, we have to explore what that means and find our own way. And then with the not taking, so not taking what's not given means just not stealing, but not kind of owning, not wanting what other people have got, sort of really kind of developing that as a theme. And then intoxication is clearly, from a Buddhist perspective, you can't be mindful if you're intoxicated. So, and to see how the benefits of keeping your mind clear are. So I'm not going to talk anymore. I just wanted to give a perspective about what Buddhism means to me. And there's a lot I haven't said about Buddhism. You're very welcome to ask questions about what I've said, or about something that you're curious about, that you've heard about Buddhism, seen about Buddhism, and wondering how do I reconcile that? So I'll leave that open to you.
It seems to be extremely personally driven, but yet you've got the guidelines as different from Quakers, where we seem to take decisions corporately. Does that not happen in Buddhism? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say that's right. I think it is about personal responsibility, Buddhism, rather than a corporate responsibility. I think this is there are two structures in Buddhism which I haven't mentioned. One is a monastic approach and one is a lay approach. And there's a monastic approach, and clearly with their community, it's a different experience for them. And whilst it's still one of self-responsibility, living in community life is a group activity, isn't it? But with lay people like myself, then there is no structure. There are no real structures in Buddhism that bring you together, but we do come together, because otherwise how can you practice? You get that support of being with others. And so I'm part of a group who, I could say there's three groups that I'm a part of. One is like a discussion group. We come together just to share our experience and practice a bit of meditation. Another one is we put on monthly events and some retreats, which I support and lead some of them. And that's, people really find it helpful to come together to share their practice with like-minded people. And then I teach in another group, which they come together once a week, and they certainly find it beneficial. It's more on a kind of receiving teaching approach. So that's not a corporate decision-making process, if that's what you're talking about. It's a coming together of spiritual friends. That's what that is.
I just wondered how it would fit in the fact that you also came to Quakers, and whether you find it difficult or very different being a Quaker.
Buildings have to be maintained wherever you are, don't they? Sort of some of the Quaker things, finances have to be dealt with. I do that for the Buddhist monastery as well. And they have a structure where you can feed in and organise and run. The monastery has to have a structure, isn't it, with finance people. People that can help give advice about various things. So I do that. But no, there isn't a kind of group. If we, there's no, like I can email, I could email a lot of people, maybe hundreds of people, and I could say, this thing's happened, and would you like to consider having a response? But actually, I've never done that. I've never heard, like with the Iraq war happening, would we like to have a particular response to it? I've never done that. Because I think that's partly because I think people that are interested in Buddhism often coming from, say, a Quaker background or from a Jewish background or different backgrounds, and they've got other avenues that they can explore in terms of taking social action. And I don't think people come to Buddhism in this country to do social action. I think what they come to is find some peace and some understanding and some perspective on life, rather than coming to Buddhism to lead. And certainly Buddhism is not going to lead you in any sort of political capacity, because it's, as I say, it focuses primarily on self, on your own, how you experience life, rather than preferably not to interfere too much with how other people, but be tolerant of how other people experience.
Martin, how do you reconcile, it's not quite the right word, but how would you explain meditation is very much an individual process, am I right in thinking? Very much with us as individuals. Now when any of us come to Quaker meeting, and we are told, I suppose we are told through Quaker faith and practice, that we have, in our silence is a corporate silence rather than an individual meditation. How would you say, in what ways is that different, apart from the corporate idea of upholding one another?
I think that there is, if you were to go to Amaravati Temple, most people say it has an incredible sense of peace. And some people will say, well, that's because people have been meditating there for 20 years. And it has something absorbed, in the space. So that's an experience that they've had, that some people have. But that's about the extent of it, really. It's not, there's not a presence, an external presence as such. Like if you imagine, if you think that there's if you think that it's a thought, if you experience that as your experience, then that's what the Buddhist way of seeing it is. It's not to add more than that. If you feel like coming into the meeting house here, gives you, sitting together, creates a sort of sense of togetherness, being together. That's a felt sense. It's the Buddhist way of thinking, not anything else. There's nothing added to that.
Can you explain mindfulness rather more? Now, I see Buddhism as a discipline in the sense you have to sit down as you do. Churchgoers sometimes say they have a prayer time, which I don't know, but they're then putting petitions, I suppose, to God in that sort of sense. But with Buddhism, in the first place, you have to do the initial sitting down, allotting a certain amount of time. Now, I do like that idea, but how do you stop these things? My mind goes everywhere except in the moment. Which will include mindfulness. For instance, if I'm washing up, how do I get into that mindfulness and say, can concentrate on the washing up and not concentrating on anything else? Is mindfulness, does it come into every action.
Yes, it does. So but we have to distinguish between mindfulness and concentration because they're not the same, although they're very similar and kind of linked. If you're concentrating on washing up, that's concentrating on washing up. But mindfulness is not a focusing, it's a broadening. It's just the opposite, if you like. So when focusing is focusing, isn't it? I want to say, if you focus on a piece of rice that's on the floor, you're focusing on that bit of rice, aren't you? But mindfulness is broadening so that you're aware of everything that's more. Whatever you're aware, whatever's coming into your consciousness, whatever arising, is to be something you can be mindful of. So the sounds that are occurring over there, the sight of somebody here, and then, you know. So that's amazing, isn't it? The flow of consciousness, the flow of conscious impression is incredible, incredibly rapid, and there's so much coming in. But mindfulness is to hold gently that experience, so that we can notice, even when we're washing up, we can notice a thought that arises, many thoughts that arise. We don't necessarily know all of those thoughts, but we can notice that our minds are busy. And we don't have to think I'm distracted and it's something which I shouldn't be and I'm blaming myself. One of the key things with mindfulness is not being non-judgmental about our experience. So that's, you can wash up and just wash up, and that's brilliant. But sometimes we can wash up and we've got so much going on in our heads, we're doing so much more than washing up, aren't we? But we can still notice that without judging it. And so one of the key things is not to judge our experience, but to see what's happening, to try to be as aware as we can in the moment. And it's an interesting experience thing, because part of that to be in the present moment is the willingness to let go of regret about the past, and the willingness to accept that we can't sort everything out in the future, because everything in the future is unknown, and whatever it is a dream, and the past is just a memory, and we can't even be sure about whether we've got that right. All we can really know is what's in the present moment, so we're just trying encouraging ourselves to recognise the present and let go of worry or regrets and things like that, just get into the present. So it's it's not actually easy thing to describe. You have to try it, you have to do it, and it's only then you can sort of get the idea. But these books I've brought will help to understand more about mindfulness.
Sorry, Martin, do you chant?
Yes.
Or meditating? You do chant?
I don't chant at home or anything like that. I don't find it
Your question, please.
The question was, do I chant? Alice said, do I chant? And the question was, do I chant? And I said, no, I don't chant at home. But when I go to the monastery, if everyone's chanting, because it's a common thing to do that at the beginning before meditation, then it's common for Buddhists to do some chanting. And I'll join in and I'll chant, because that's what we're doing. I wouldn't normally do that at home, but some Buddhists would. But it's more chanting. It has two purposes. One is it's a calming thing to do. It can be a way of it can be a conditioning process where it's a preliminary thing that you do just to calm down, and before you start to practice meditation. Or the second purpose is it can be useful in a meditation. So, for example, if you're chanting about loving kindness, may all beings be well and happy. If you were chanting, may all beings be well and happy, that will affect your mind and it will influence you. If you were chanting, may beings be free from suffering. And you could use that as a meditation practice, and you might internally chant it over and over again in your mind as you were meditating.
Almost like a Taizé chant, the Taizé chants unaccompanied, where they repeat. In fact, we sang one here once.
That's
Somebody.
called a mantra. So you can take mantras as an object of meditation practice. There's a vast array of Buddhist meditation approaches and different techniques.
I'm interested in your thoughts on reincarnation.
I've got to give a talk in October about life after death. And somebody asked me to give a talk. And I can't imagine why they chose me. Because I think they chose me because they thought that they couldn't ask anybody else. All of the other religions have got some sort of opinion about life after death, but Buddhism hasn't really. There is a teaching that's very strong in Buddhism about not reincarnation but rebirth. What happened was the Buddha grew up in a society that believed in reincarnation, which is the idea that a soul goes from one being to another at death. And it's actually then our objective is to purify the soul, so that eventually you get born in the Brahma realm, something like that. I don't know a lot about Hindu or pre-Hindu sort of thinking. But as my understanding, that's what the Buddha had. And he said, no, that's not correct. Who's this self that's getting born again? Where is it? You can't point it to me. They had the idea, there's a little bit inside us somewhere, this is the soul, and it went off and flew across and into another realm. And the Buddha said, well, I can't see that. That's not, I can't find a scientific basis for that. And it's a very scientific kind of religion because everything's based on experience. He couldn't experience that. But he did accept that the power of desire and attachment to the world is incredibly strong. And that when people die, they can have a terrific desire to continue to live. And so his teaching is that, that can continue, and perhaps it does, take some further form, but not a sort of self. It's not really you that goes from one life to another. It's just another desire. You have desire that passes on, and conditions that continue. That's it going a bit theoretical, certainly beyond my experience. And I think I'm prepared to accept it because nobody else, there's lots of many different ideas. It seems to be have some merit. I think that I won't know until I die. And I'm not, the great thing about practice for me is about being in the present. And the thing that's very interesting is, from the Buddhist perspective, is the goal of Buddhism is to bring rebirth to an end. So it's not like something that's praised, the idea of being reborn, but actually it's only another load of suffering. Like you don't know where you're going to be reborn, what condition you might be in, and whether or not that's going to be pleasant or painful, and most likely it's certainly going to have a lot of suffering involved. So there's a lot of good reasons to bring it to an end, and that's where, according to the Buddhist teaching, the realization of truth is the ending of that desire to continue. So this is good enough. It's like bringing our heaven into this life, if you like. There's nothing desirable to be reborn into. We should make the most of our human life. This is all we know. We can't be sure about anything else.
Would you say that all Buddhists are pacifists, and are they actively involved in lobbies to, for instance, on issues like the Trident, to get involved politically in campaigns against war?
There are some Buddhists who do campaign, and they will campaign against Trident and such like. But that's the minority, I would say very small minority. I would personally say I think that is very small. that most Buddhists don't bring their Buddhism into the political arena. It's more of a personal religion, and so there are politically active Buddhists in parts of the world, and especially you know of some monks that sometimes have been politically active, are politically active. That's not something that's praised really in Buddhism. It's not to say that people shouldn't be politically active, but bringing under the banner of Buddhism, it's not really. That's not what Buddhism is about. You can act in a way, whatever you think is right is the way you should act, rather than doing a certain ism and saying this is Buddhism and we have to behave like this.
Right. It doesn't sound as if there's much value attached to reflection or memory.
There is.
I'm thinking about, the way we form narratives about things that have happened in the past. Two people who have experienced the same things will never make the same narrative out of it. All of that.
So we won't believe in it. So the idea is not to believe what you think. So you can get all this stuff coming up and saying, yes, and she did this and I did that and they did that and I did that, and therefore that's why I hate them. And you don't believe it. You can see hear the narrative. Yes, okay, it was a memory. Maybe some of that happened. Their perspective is different from mine. Is it of much value? So I think probably it isn't. It's something just to notice and let go of, because it's not real. It's not true. We can be sure it's not true. It's got to be misremembered to a certain extent. And anyway, it doesn't take us forward. If remembering something that occurred in the past can give a useful sort of present moment or a future benefit, like I have explored, how is it that person I had a good relationship with and now I haven't got a good relationship with? What changed? And I will go back and say, what was it that? And when did that? What happened before it changed? When it changed, the first time I remembered it was this thing happened, this event. And after that, things never seem to be quite the same. That's interesting. You can learn something from that, can't you? So there is a...
Can I just comment? You learn such a lot by comparing narratives with other people, of sympathy, of understanding of other people. So you could be doing this is not a criticism, I'm just trying to work something out. So you could be doing yes, this is what happened, but the other person, of course, have a completely different perspective on it. So unless you're comparing narratives with other people, where does the sympathy with other people come in?
Well, in that case, I went and talked to the person, so you have to, don't you? And you go and talk to them and say, what is it, how can we, just to kind of, if it's only to just talk about the weather, actually, you don't have to resolve the conflict, but just to sort of resolve the conflict in some way. You have to find a way to resolve conflict with people, but not sure that answers your question.
Is that a point, Martin, maybe you mentioned something about metta practice, loving kindness as well, which is one aspect of Buddhist practice.
Exactly, it's a really good tool. So when I notice conflict, and I will bring loving kindness, cultivating loving kindness towards that person is a good start. And then that frees the anger or the hatred. So then you can stand back from that. But the first thing I had to do was to admit I was angry. The second thing, I'm angry now, I've got to cultivate loving kindness to ease that bond, the kind of ease or untangle it a bit. And then I realised what I need to do is to go and talk to them. And go and talk to them when I didn't want to, but still I did it. Because I was determined to resolve the conflict. So you can have a narrative, because you have to have a narrative with people.
I don't think I was thinking of conflict, actually. I was just thinking in general about understanding other people. Unless you hear their reflection narrative, and speak as a writer, I suppose, unless you hear what they have to say. And they're reflecting, they're not being in the here and the now, they're remembering. So, you know, you don't seem to value that very much.
I value it enormously, especially because I wouldn't interrupt them. And I wouldn't impose what I've got to say on them, and just so you can just listen, can't you? And just to be, you know, that is really valuable to hear what people have to say, not to feel that you have to. Because if you can listen without thinking of, you know, properly give your attention to somebody, that is mindfulness. And one of the things I found with practicing mindfulness, one of the biggest benefits was when I was working, I had 30 people reporting to me, and give your full attention to people when you've got a job to do as well is really challenging. But you have to, you know, to listen to people and to give your undivided attention. That's a lot to ask. There's a lot of practice there to be in the present moment with that, to really be in the present moment with people when they're interrupting you, because you really don't want them there. You'd really like to do this because you've got to get it done, sort of thing. But to be willing to be with them, give them your time, is a really good practice. So I did find that really valuable. And it worked incredibly well, because if one thing people really want is for you to give your attention to them, it makes a big difference to relationships. And when you have good relationships with people, then they'll do anything you ask them. So it's a really good thing, you know, if you're as a manager, to cultivate that.
I'm sorry to draw to the close, but time is drawing on. And with those, particularly those last thoughts, thank you very much, Martin. It's been a lot to think about. And I shall expect you all here next week. Not a Buddhist. not to be tempted. No. Thank you, Martin, and I will be all
I'll put these on the table if you're interested.